3 people were reportedly killed and dozens more injured early Tuesday after Ukraine struck a missile production facility deep inside Russia. Russian officials say the missile hit the factory in the industrial city of Ivskesk.
Now, Russia is facing a crisis not on the battlefield but in the nursery.
The country's population is shrinking at a pace not seen in decades as fewer babies are being born and more people are dying young.
A massive fire at an oil depot near the Black Sea resort of Sochi has been blamed by Russia on a Ukrainian drone attack. It was one of a series of strikes on Russian military infrastructure this weekend.
It's early 2025, and for the first time in decades, whispers of collapse are being spoken about a nuclear superpower. Russia, the so-called indomitable Eurasian giant, is now fighting wars on 3 fronts. One, in Ukraine, where its military is bleeding men and machines faster than it can replace them. 2, at home, where an aging, shrinking population is hollowing out its economy. And 3, in the global arena, where sanctions have severed it from the Western markets it once depended on. Yes! These are not just headlines. These are numbers confirmed by Russia's own statistics agency, global think tanks, and Western intelligence leaks. The population is falling at the fastest pace since the Soviet collapse. GDP growth has flatlined. The military is running out of conscripts. And China, not Moscow, now calls the shots in their partnership. Now the only question left isn't if Russia will break, but when and how severely. Not so long ago, Russia was a rising power with oil-fueled wealth, swelling cities, and an expanding sphere of influence. So, how did it go from this to a crumbling empire in just a generation? To understand how things changed so drastically, we need to look back. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Russia inherited nuclear weapons, vast territory, and a struggling economy. For them, the 1990s were difficult. Inflation destroyed savings, unemployment rose, and crime increased. Oligarchs gained control of major industries, while living standards for ordinary Russians fell sharply. And in 2000, Vladimir Putin became president, promising stability and order. For much of the 2000s, high oil prices brought a period of economic growth. Western companies invested in Russia, technology imports increased, and infrastructure improved. Cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg modernized quickly, and the government was able to increase spending on the military and public services. By 2008, Russia was confident enough to assert itself internationally, as seen in the brief war with Georgia. So at this point, the country appeared stable and even growing in power. But even during this period of prosperity, weaknesses remained. The economy relied heavily on oil and gas exports, making it vulnerable to price changes. Corruption was widespread, reducing efficiency and trust in institutions. And the population was aging, with birth rates staying below the level needed to replace the workforce. These problems didn't disappear during the boom years, they simply became less visible. By 2014, events would bring them back to the surface. In 2014, Russia made a major move that changed its relationship with the world. It annexed Crimea from Ukraine. This action was widely condemned internationally. The United States, the European Union, and other countries responded with economic sanctions. These sanctions targeted banks, energy companies, and key individuals close to the Kremlin. At first, Russia adapted. Oil prices were still relatively high, and the country shifted more trade toward Asia. The government presented the annexation as a success and used it to boost national pride. But the sanctions had a long-term effect. They limited access to Western financing, technology, and investment. This made it harder for Russia to modernize its industries, especially in energy and manufacturing. Then, in February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This brought far harsher sanctions than in 2014. More than 1,500 foreign companies left the Russian market, and trade with Western countries dropped sharply. The war also became expensive. Billions of dollars were diverted to the military. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded in the first year, and the losses in equipment were massive. By 2023 and 2024, the economic strain was clear. Inflation rose to nearly 10%. Pushing up the cost of basic goods. The budget deficit widened as the government spent heavily on the war. Healthcare, education, and infrastructure received fewer resources as defense took priority. These developments mark the point where many of Russia's old weaknesses, reliance on energy, demographic decline, and lack of diversification, began to accelerate into a much deeper crisis. One of Russia's most serious problems today is its shrinking population. This is not a new issue, but it has become much worse in recent years. In 2024, Russia's population fell by more than 596,000 people due to what's called natural decline, meaning more people died than were born. That's like an entire city of 600,000 people vanishing from the map every single year. This was the largest drop since the Soviet Union collapsed, and even worse than the decline in 2023, which was about 495,000. Russia's official statistics agency, Rosstat, reports that the working age population has dropped by almost 10 million people since the year 2000. Russia's fertility rate, the average number of children a woman will have in her lifetime, dropped to 1.41 in 2024. Experts say that at least 2.1 is needed to keep a population stable. Many rural areas are also emptying out. Since 2000, over 20,000 rural settlements have disappeared entirely, and nearly 36,000 villages now have 10 or fewer residents. In 2023 alone, the rural population dropped by 1.11%, the fastest rate on record. The Far East, which makes up over a third of Russia's territory, is especially affected. In some districts, population density has fallen to less than 1 person per square kilometer. Since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, between 800,000 and 1.3 million Russians have left the country, according to the Wilson International Center. Most of them are young, educated, and skilled, exactly the type of workers the economy needs. Sectors like IT, engineering, medicine, and academia have been hit the hardest. This brain drain not only reduces the workforce now, but also makes it harder for the economy to recover in the future. So by 2030, Russia is expected to have only 2 working age adults for every retiree. In 2000, that ratio was 5-1. This puts a huge strain on the pension system, which depends on a large base of workers to support older citizens. The Labor Ministry warns that the labor shortage could reach 11 million workers by 2030. In 2024, the shortage was already at 5 million, nearly 7% of the workforce. Even if other problems were solved, this population crisis would take decades to reverse. If you've enjoyed this deep dive, please like the video and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to bring you more global insights and perspectives. And now, let's return to the video. Russia's economy is also under heavy pressure from war costs, sanctions, and its shrinking workforce. Growth has slowed to near zero, while inflation and deficits are rising. In early 2025, Russia's GDP grew by only 0.6% compared to the previous year. For an economy that needs steady growth to improve living standards, this is a serious warning sign. Inflation has also risen sharply. In 2024 to 2025, prices increased by 9.5%, more than double the official target. This has reduced purchasing power for ordinary Russians. In the first half of 2025, Russia's budget deficit reached about $41 billion, which is already over 90% of the target for the entire year. The government's accessible foreign currency reserves have dropped by more than 60% since 2022, limiting its ability to defend the ruble or pay for imports. To cover the deficit, the government has cut funding for healthcare, education, and infrastructure, diverting more money toward military spending. Some of Russia's key industries are also struggling badly. Between 14.6 million and 18 million Russians, around 12% of the population live below the poverty line. A 2024 survey found that 35% of Russians have no savings at all, and 42% have savings that would only last less than 1 month. For decades, oil and gas were the backbone of Russia's economy. They provided around 45% of federal budget revenues and gave Moscow strong influence over energy-dependent countries, especially in Europe. Now, that advantage is also disappearing. Since sanctions began, Russia's oil and gas revenues have dropped by 28%. That 28% drop equals the entire national budget of the Philippines, a country of 115 million people. And this decline continued into 2025, blowing the Kremlin wallet. The biggest blow came from Europe. In 2021, the European Union imported 155 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. By 2024, that number had collapsed to 29 billion cubic meters, an 81% drop. To make up for lost European customers, Russia has turned to China and India, but these countries buy Russian oil and gas at steep discounts, often 20 to 30% below global market prices. This means Russia earns far less for each barrel or cubic meter it sells. The loss of Western technology has also created serious problems. Much of Russia's oil and gas equipment was imported from Europe and the United States. Now, without access to that technology, it is harder to maintain old fields or develop new ones. So without new investments in advanced technology, experts warn that Russia's overall oil and gas production could fall by 40% by 2030. The war in Ukraine has been the most costly military operation for Russia since World War II, both in lives and in equipment. Since 2022, independent analysts and Western intelligence sources estimate that over 950,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, wounded, or captured. This includes both professional soldiers and newly mobilized recruits. Such high casualties have a lasting impact. Experienced officers and specialized troops are difficult to replace. Training new soldiers takes time, and the quality of replacements is often lower. The losses in military hardware are also huge. Russia has lost more than 10,700 tanks, which is more than it had in active service before the war began. Many of the replacements are old Soviet-era models taken from storage, and in some cases, even museum pieces have been sent to the front lines. Now, by 2026, Russia is expected to have 30% fewer conscripts compared to 2021. This makes it harder to sustain the current war or prepare for any new conflicts. Before the war, Russia was the world's second largest arms exporter. Now, its arms exports have dropped by 92% since 2021. Countries like India, Egypt, and Vietnam have canceled contracts worth billions. The poor performance of Russian weapons on the battlefield has damaged their reputation, making it harder to sell them abroad. Russia's war in Ukraine and its confrontation with the West have left it more isolated on the world stage than at any time since the Soviet era. Since 2022, Russia has been hit with more than 13,500 international sanctions, more than any other country in the world, including Iran, North Korea, and Syria. These sanctions target banking, energy, technology, and trade, as well as individuals linked to the government. The result is that Russia now has far fewer trade partners and much less access to global markets. With Europe and the United States closed off, Russia has turned to China as its main economic lifeline. China now supplies over 40% of Russia's imports, up from 25% before the war. In return, Russia sells oil, gas, and raw materials to China, often at discounted prices. This trade has kept the Russian economy from collapsing completely, but it has also made the country heavily dependent on Beijing. Some analysts warn that Russia is becoming a junior partner to China, relying on it not just for trade, but for technology and financial connections. At the United Nations, Russia's circle of reliable allies is now small. Support often comes only from countries like Belarus, North Korea, Eritrea, and Nicaragua, states that are themselves isolated internationally. Many countries that once maintained a balanced relationship with Russia now keep their distance to avoid conflict with Western powers. Well, Russia's political system has long appeared stable from the outside, but the pressures of war, sanctions, and economic decline are beginning to show cracks. Since 2022, at least 24 former Russian billionaires have changed their nationality, taking an estimated $110 billion in assets out of the country. Many are moving their families and businesses abroad to protect them from sanctions and political risks. This capital flight drains money from the Russian economy and reduces the loyalty of the country's wealthiest and most influential figures. Reports suggest that President Vladimir Putin has become more cautious and distrustful of those around him. According to leaked accounts, he frequently changes his sleeping locations and uses food tasters. The FSB, Russia's security service, now conducts over 170 loyalty checks on political and military elites each week. These actions point to fears of betrayal, dissent, or even coup attempts within the inner circle. And since the start of the war, over 20,000 anti-war protesters have been detained. More than 417,000 websites have been blocked, and the number of political prisoners is at levels not seen since the Soviet Union. While repression has kept open dissent to a minimum, it has also increased public frustration, especially in regions far from Moscow. And in some non-Russian ethnic regions, military recruitment quotas are being missed by as much as 70%. Local leaders are quietly distancing themselves from Moscow, and underground polling in late 2024 showed that almost half of respondents in some regions would prefer independence. If central control weakens further, these regions could push for more autonomy or even break away entirely. Russia has the largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world, with about 5,889 warheads. Under normal circumstances, these are controlled under strict procedures. But as political and military pressure increases, there is concern that the threshold for using them could be lowered. Western intelligence agencies have warned that in moments of crisis, Moscow might threaten or attempt nuclear blackmail to deter foreign intervention. This increases the risk of miscalculation, where threats escalate into actions that no one intended. If Russia's situation worsens rapidly, millions of people could try to leave the country. Research from Pew and other organizations suggests that such a wave could create the largest refugee crisis in Europe's modern history, even bigger than that caused by the war in Ukraine. Countries on Russia's borders, and especially in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, are already making contingency plans for this possibility. As Russia's problems deepen, governments and intelligence agencies abroad are preparing for the possibility of sudden instability. Leaked intelligence reports suggest that the United States, NATO, and other Western allies have developed a contingency plan called Operation Firewall. The goal is to prepare for a rapid Russian collapse and prevent chaos from spilling over into other countries. Operation Firewall reportedly focuses on securing nuclear sites to prevent weapons or materials from falling into the wrong hands, managing refugee flows in case millions of Russians try to leave suddenly, stabilizing energy and food markets to limit global disruption if Russian exports stop. While these plans are not public, multiple credible leaks suggest they are already in place and ready to be activated if needed. Analysts often compare the current situation to the end of previous empires, including the Soviet Union. Research on imperial collapse suggests that once the final phase begins, it typically lasts 18 to 36 months. According to Euromaidan Press and other observers, Russia entered this phase in 2024, meaning the potential endpoint could be as early as late 2025 or as late as mid-2026. So Russia is not just any country, it is the largest by land area, one of the biggest energy exporters, and a nuclear superpower. Its collapse or major weakening would shift the balance of power worldwide, affecting Europe, Asia, and even markets and security in North America. From the outside, Russia still looks vast and unshakable. But inside, the pillars that hold it up, its people, its economy, its military, its elite unity are all crumbling at once. The empire that once spanned 11 time zones may now be in the final, irreversible stage of collapse. The only thing left to ask is, when the fall comes, will the world be ready? If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to Ceasefire Now for more deep dives into geopolitics. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and let us know what you'll think. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.